Hey guys, this is Shar, Constitutional Truth. Look at me just moving all over the place. Alright, I wanted to come and talk to you guys about Constitutional Truth. Yeah, there we go. Uh, Critical race theory and white supremacy, a self-fulfilling prophecy. Um, it really kind of is. So, I've got my Twitter up, and I'm showing you the account of Karlin Borisenko, the most dangerous knitter. Yeah, she is really the most dangerous knitter alive. Next to me, maybe. I don't know. She and I can argue about that. Anyway, no, she's an organizational psychologist, and um, yeah, she did break Coca Cola, but she's really pushing back against the critical race theory in schools. And she's been pushing back against critical race theory as a whole um, for about a year and a half. So, anyway, um, to talk about critical race theory, you have to understand what it is. What we're seeing in schools right now isn't critical race theory per se. We're seeing the application of it, okay? We're not seeing critical race theory itself or critical theory itself being taught. We're seeing it applied in K through 12, okay? Um, but critical theory came from the Frankfurt School in Germany, um, post World War II Germany, and it's a continuation of Marxism, from Karl Marx. And so critical race theory, in my opinion, is a subset of critical theory. And when it came to the U.S., it kind of hung around in the law schools to look at law, to see, to look at it critically, theoretically. Are our laws neutral? How are they being applied? Uh, this, that, and the other. Um, and so the academics at our universities picked up that theory, that critical theory, and decided to apply it to everything, and specifically to race and intersectionality. And it's just gone haywire from there. And so that's what we're seeing applied in our K through 12. But it's also applied in government, in military, and in the private sector as a replacement. And here I'm talking about not the teaching of the theory, again, the application thereof. We're seeing it as a replacement to diversity training in these various sectors. Um, for about 30 years or so, we saw, I'm talking about people, Gen Xers and older. We were subjected to, or we participated in diversity training programs in military, in government, and in the private sector. And those trainings were, for all intents and purposes, and, I would say pretty much accepted by all people. They were not seen as invasive. They weren't seen as destructive. They certainly weren't seen as racist. They were inclusive, diverse, and tolerant. That was what we were. That's what we were taught. That's what how they were presented, and it was, treat people with respect, treat them as your peers, your equals. It was based on equality. It was racism bad, sexism bad, equality good, and so that's what we had. And I would say maybe the last 5 years or so, the application of critical race theory started creeping in to these various sectors. The last 2 years is when it started creeping into the K through 12 system. And that's when parents started sitting up and taking notice. We were pretty tolerant of it in our workplaces. We were like, okay, we'll deal with that. When it came into our schools is when we drew the line. And we can argue about whether or not that was good or bad, but it's because it's replacing diversity training and the perniciousness of what CRT is teaching. or how it how the application of it is what it's pushing on people. That's what's really getting to a lot of us. And again, like I said, as adults, we can tolerate it, but when they start pushing it on our children, that's where we're drawing the line. Now, there's some differences in language with diversity training and CRT, and I kind of touched on that a little bit. With CRT, we have equity, whereas with diversity training, we have equality. And equity is in reference to outcomes. We want an equity of outcome, and not so much an equality of opportunity. Whereas when we're born, we should all have the same opportunities, but with CRT, it's when we become adults, we should all have the same outcome. So everyone should have the same house, the same car, the same money. Whereas when we're born, we should all start out with the same opportunity, and how it ends up in the end is based on what you do and how things play out. With diversity training, racism was bigotry with intention from one person to another based on race. Whereas now, racism is prejudice plus power. And since only whites have power, then only whites can be racist. Meaning that people of color, or BIPOC, or whatever the current term is that is allowed, they can't be racist. They can be bigoted, but they can't be racist. And then, of course, we have whiteness, white privilege, and white supremacy. And white supremacy used to be in reference to neo-Nazis, or the white identitarians, Aryan Nation, those types of people that all of us traditionally agreed were extremist, wrong, and to be shunned from society. But now white supremacy, it has been diluted to mean anything that is white, or any person that is white, and it's very strange. And it truly just, again, it dilutes the meaning of the term. And again, I want to emphasize that what is happening in our K through 12 schools is not teaching critical race theory at the way that it's done at university, but applying that theory. So when your children are told to do privilege walks or marches or whatever the heck it is that they do, that's applying the theory, not teaching them critical race theory, because that's a completely different thing. We also are seeing it in government, and this is something that is new. I mean, whereas critical race theory used to be something that was relegated to the confines of academia, universities, or I should say just critical theory in general, no matter where they happen to, whatever they happen to apply it to. Now government is using critical theory, and specifically critical race theory. They're using it in legislation, they're using it with the military on their reading list, they're using it with training with the military, and there's examples for all of this. Critical race theory and what they also call diversity, equity, and I forgot what the I stood for, DEI. It's breeding a resurgence in white supremacy ideology and groups. And this is why I brought up Dr. Borsenko's Twitter page. Very recently, like I said, she's been doing this for about a year and a half, but very recently, I would say sometime last week is when she mentioned it, white identitarians, white supremacists, whatever term you want to use for them, have begun to flood her Twitter and flood her YouTube comment sections when she does live or when she uploads, have flooded her comments, flooded her Twitter with using the term CRT as anti-white. And when they do that, naive, unknowing people who are white, whether they're conservative, whether they're centrist, whether they're liberal, leaning to the left, not leftist, the ones that are pushing CRT, but no matter their political stripe, they're looking at that and they're saying, yeah, you're right. And these identitarians are now recruiting. Okay, and I would presume that they're not just doing it to her, but they're doing it to other people like James Lindsay, flooding his feed, Mr. Rufo, flooding his feed, and the other people that are in the forefront pushing against CRT. So she did a video last week warning people not to call it anti-white. And she's correct, because it isn't anti-white, it's racist. In fact, it's Marxist. Okay? And I will explain why in a minute. But they're claiming that it's racist against only whites, but it's not. Okay? I will explain why it's racist against others in a moment as well. But they are openly recruiting on social media, not just in her feed, but on their own Twitters, on their own YouTubes, and their other social media presence. Now, on one hand, one can understand why they would say this, because we've had how many years of straight white male is the most dangerous in America. I mean, it's that push, and you can only push people so long before. I can't tell you how many times my boyfriend and I have looked at each other, hearing this kind of vitriol, looked at each other and said, they're going to push so far, it's like beating a dog. You beat it so much and it's going to bite back. Okay? So it's understandable that there will be an increase in numbers with these groups. Some people who may not be racist at all or may be bigoted are going to go on ahead and become racist, because there's only so much people can take. And then there's going to be others that will not be racist at all, not even be bigoted, but be minding their own business and have, like what happened out in California with the elderly woman who checked on her Amazon shipment, and the Amazon delivery driver said, your white privilege doesn't work here, and started beating on her, all because the white woman said, you're behaving like a B word. Okay? Well, while that attack was from the driver to the white woman, there's going to come a time when it's going to be a white male or a white woman that is going to go down, or, be minding their own business per se, or asking a simple question, and the person pops off with something stupid from this critical race theory garbage, and they're going to fight back. Because you can only push people so far. So there is some quote-unquote logic to it, but at the same time, it's not true. Okay? So while I can see the argument, I can also understand completely what Garland is saying. Because I don't like the way the pendulum is swinging. We want it to stop in the middle. We don't want it to go all the way back. Okay? We know what happens. We don't want the cross burnings in the yards again. We want it to stop here. Because it started here, it went to here, it's gone to here, we want it to come back and stay here again. And that's not what's happening. So, we've got the Department of Justice with AG Garland, and we've got President Biden claiming that white supremacy is the #1 threat in the United States. Mind you, there's about 17 number one threats to the United States all at the same time, but neither of them gave any evidence. Neither of them provided any hint of white supremacy violence against a minority. Neither of them mentioned the leftist violence that is all over the place. They're using CRT and diversity, equity, and inclusion language, such as birthing person instead of mother in certain legislation. There are two programs, government programs, that exclude whites specifically, one for farmers and one for restaurants. And all of this lack of evidence, this leftist violence that's being ignored, the use of language in legislation, and these government programs excluding whites will end up in a self-fulfilling prophecy, which will have the CRT pushing leftists and the government both saying, see, we told you so, we told you so, we told you so. All because of existing identitarians recruiting innocent people who are hearing that whites are the devil, whites are privileged, even if they live in Appalachia and have no shoes. They're more privileged than Oprah Winfrey, this, that, and the other. And they're going to go, yeah, you're right. Okay? So we have to avoid this. Okay? And these folks are not necessarily hearing the black parents that are at school board meetings saying, I don't want my child being told that they're lesser than. I don't want my black child being told that they cannot achieve. I don't like this bigotry of low expectations being taught to my child, which is exactly what it is, which is racist. And they're black, so it's not anti-white. Or the Asian children and college students who are being told by Ivy League schools, you have to score higher than your peers of other races in order to enter our colleges because you're smarter than them. Wait, what? That's racist. So, all of these different things that are happening, the entire thing is racist against everyone. So you need to homeschool your children. You need to push back against this crap in your workplace. File a lawsuit, go to the EEOC, do whatever it is that you have to do. Do not use anti-white because it is simply racist against all. Don't use the word anti-white. Use the word racist. Use the word Marxist. Okay? This stuff teaches that whites are superior and the oppressors, and that black, indigenous, and people of color are inferior and oppressed. Okay, you see that dichotomy? Whites are this. Black, indigenous, people of color are this. Whites are successful because they're privileged. Black, indigenous, people of color are failures because they're not privileged. So do you see this difference here? This one against the other? We've got the bourgeois and the poor. The reason I mention the bourgeois and the poor is because these Marxists, these communists, are pulling a page right out of Mao's Cultural Revolution. This is a book I'm reading right now, The Cultural Revolution by Frank Decotter. Or Decotter, I don't know how that name is pronounced, forgive me. This is one of 3 books that he wrote about China and Mao's rule over them. During the Cultural Revolution, Mao set up the revolutionaries, the bourgeois,
which were the landowners, the university and school professors, against the poor. In the U.S. right now, the cultural Marxists are setting up the whites against the black, indigenous, people of color, and the LGBTQ+. It's the same shit. History repeats itself. Learn from it. Read this book or any other book you can get on the Cultural Revolution. Just make sure it's a proper history book and not just some novel, okay? It's repeating. Learn from it so you don't repeat it. We don't want to do this again. We do not want to do this again. Upwards of 60 million people died in China. We don't have exact numbers because they didn't keep numbers. Please, don't let this happen again. Not in our America. Thank you so much for your time. Please share this video. Please like this video. Please subscribe to the channel. Please leave a comment. Let me know what you think about it. All right. We'll check you later.